Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirk, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 waiver wire targets for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're talking about the most highly coveted waiver wire pickups going into Week 2, guys that can immediately be picked up, started, and make impact on your lineups to help you win in Week 2 and beyond. Of course, we'll be talking about my top 6 running back, wide receiver, tight end targets, and of course a handful of quarterbacks and defenses that can be streamed in the coming weeks if the options that you've already played in Week 1 aren't the best, and potentially you could end up pivoting from them in the coming weeks. But besides the waiver wire pickups and the targets that we're going to be mentioning and going over today, I want to welcome you to Overreaction Monday. Again, this is the Monday after the first week of fantasy football, and it happens every year. Many of you are going to see the performances of your team and players on your team, and you're going to tilt, and you're going to begin to want to trade them and want to move your players because you just didn't find success in Week 1. But you have to remember, this is a marathon. There's a reason why we're going to play 17 weeks of fantasy football to determine a champion. Just one game, 1 week, one performance from a player does not define them as a whole. There's a reason why we covet consistency as much as we do in the fantasy football landscape. It's because one game does not define you as a team or a player in their own right. You know, when we talk about Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Najee Harris, Stephon Diggs, when we talk about these wide receivers not having blow-up games, yes, I understand it's really demoralizing because you want to win, especially you want to start off the season on the right foot. But I guarantee you it does not define them, as their entire season ahead of them is going to make up for this performance. You have to not tilt, you have to stay level-headed, and you have to understand that these things happen. Games like this will happen every year, and we're going to live and we're going to learn through them. And we're going to try to make our rosters better by improving and bringing in players, whether it is via trade or waiver wire, that are going to help us win games in the coming weeks. Again, this last week, there were times in which I thought to myself, how the heck are the Detroit Lions competing with the 49ers? There are some teams that we thought were better than others, and there were some players that we thought would get more opportunity than others. But a lot of things are happening, a lot of injuries have taken place already, and we want to go ahead and address those things, and we want to make our teams better. But before we get into that today, I want to go ahead and thank you guys again for continuing to support the channel. We are very close to 50,000 subscribers. So again, if you are trying to get an upper edge on the rest of your league for the entirety of the 2020 season, because again, it is a marathon, make sure you subscribe to the channel. For those of you who consistently come out with your viewership, of course, smashing that like button and commenting down below, I cannot thank you guys enough. I do appreciate the support. So don't forget, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you click that like button down below. All right, let's get into today's video. We are talking about our Week 2 waiver wire targets. We, of course, want to start off by talking about the running back position, because for those of you who have the top waiver wire priority, you're wondering, am I going to waste my waiver wire pick for a running back this week? Or am I going to potentially get a guy that is going to be a starter or a rotational flex on my team for the rest of the season? And that's the question that we're going to be, of course, answering. But before we talk about the running back position, I want to let it be known that majority of the players that I talk about today do not have a high rostered percentage in respective leagues. I went ahead because I do play on Yahoo, ESPN, and NFL.com, all three platforms. I checked out the rostered percentages of every single player, and I will be mentioning that today. But you have to just keep in mind, majority of the players that I don't mention, guys like Jamaal Williams, Nyheim, Hines, I know many of you will probably have them available in your leagues. They should already be rostered. In Yahoo, if I'm not mistaken, these two gentlemen are rostered in 75 and 73% of leagues thus far. I will not be mentioning players that are rostered that high. I'll be mentioning players that are available in more like 70% or maybe available in 60% of leagues today. So again, just giving you some perspective as to why those kind of players are not going to be in today's video. So let's go ahead and begin with the 49ers running back in the thumbnail of the video, Elijah Mitchell. The reason why Elijah Mitchell is this week's #1 waiver wire pickup is fairly simple. Raheem Mostert is on the injured reserve. Within 4 plays of the San Francisco 49ers playing against the Detroit Lions, Raheem Mostert had a knee injury, and now he's on the injured reserve. And what they're saying is that the likelihood of his return is in 8 weeks. So who's going to be the starting running back of the San Francisco 49ers? Is it going to be Trey Sermon? Well, Trey Sermon was a healthy scratch yesterday and didn't even play. And from what all we've heard from Kyle Shanahan, he's not willing to commit to a running back, but he was very impressed with Elijah Mitchell this offseason. Another one of these rookie running backs that could end up taking the starting position of this 49ers backfield and running away with it. That's exactly what he did yesterday with 19 rushing attempts, had 104 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, all for 16.4 fantasy points. He's only rostered in 7% of leagues as it currently stands. in Yahoo formats and played 63% of the snaps yesterday. Ultimately, yes, the game script definitely benefited him because they were leading and they were continuously running the ball. But based on how much we saw JaMycal Hasty used, I know JaMycal Hasty did have a rushing touchdown but wasn't given nearly as much opportunity. It makes me believe that Elijah Mitchell is the guy that you want to potentially go after, whether it is to either pick him up and cuff him with a Trey Sermon if you already have him, or if you're just trying to replace Raheem Mostert, or maybe just trying to find a running back that recovers the Gus Edwards situation that you've dealt with in the last couple weeks. I believe Elijah Mitchell is a fantastic option because, again, we know how much value a 49ers running back has. And going forward, if he is going to stay as their lead back and garner this much opportunity, you absolutely have to be going after him and picking him up this week. That is why he is our number one running back to mention. Our number two is Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram was a surprise stud yesterday. I mean, besides the fact that the Jacksonville Jaguars got completely dog-walked, Mark Ingram was a huge part of that. And yes, the game script certainly helped him, but my goodness, 26 rushing attempts, had himself a single target, wasn't able to bring that down for a reception, but getting 27 opportunities in this offense yesterday was incredible. He totaled 85 rushing yards and had a single rushing touchdown, all for 14.5 fantasy points. As of this current moment in time, he's only rostered in 19% of leagues and played 46% of the offensive snap counts for the Houston Texans yesterday. Now, with that being said, we still saw David Johnson score a touchdown and Phillip Lindsay score a touchdown. But when we compare their opportunity of play and, total touches, it's not even close. David Johnson had 3 carries for 10 yards and 3 receptions for 18 yards on 4 targets for 1 receiving touchdown. Yes, David Johnson got over 10 fantasy points, but only had 7 opportunities yesterday. On the other hand, we had Phillip Lindsay with only 8 total opportunities, 8 rushing attempts for 25 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 8.5 fantasy points. So yes, those 2 options did score, but ultimately, when we see Mark Ingram touch the ball 26 times on the ground, that is ginormous opportunity. And for a guy that's widely available in 80% of leagues as it currently stands, he is someone that I'm certainly going after. And though their matchups aren't the greatest, you still can get a starting running back in the National Football League, and you can never have enough of those on your roster. We have James White as our number 3 option. Now that Josh McDaniels' offense is getting back to what they were certainly doing with Tom Brady in years past in comparison to the running attack that they had with Cam Newton under center last season, I think James White is going to continue to see more and more opportunity in this offense. Besides the fact that he had 4 rushing attempts for 12 yards and 7 targets that led to 6 receptions, 49 receiving yards, and a total of 9.1 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, a guy that's available in 77% of leagues as this current moment in time, played 37% of the snap count. And the thing that I wanted to specifically mention, Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris both coughed up the ball yesterday. They both fumbled. We all know Bill Belichick, he's an old school coach. If you fumble, you are going to be punished. And there's a potential that we may even see more of a usage out of James White in the coming weeks because of this, whether it is on the ground or through the air. Obviously, through the air is where he finds his value, but we've also seen James White be a top 12 fantasy running back in years past and certainly find himself success on the ground. So, there's a possibility that role can be expanded in the coming weeks. But in terms of the air, Mac Jones was an incredible quarterback this past weekend. Yes, he wasn't able to get a victory. He wasn't able to put up the biggest stats, but being 29 for 39 passing, that's a 74% non-adjusted completion percentage. So it doesn't count any spikes and throwaways in his respective offense or even dropped passes from his respective receivers. So ultimately, pretty good. They're going to continue to check it down, keep everything pretty much close to the line of scrimmage for this young quarterback until he continues to learn. They play against the Jets this upcoming week. It's a fantastic matchup. Just want to go ahead and throw that out there for James White. Number 4 is Tony Jones Jr. of the New Orleans Saints. He is currently the handcuff of Alvin Kamara, and we saw a lot of usage of him yesterday. Obviously, it had to do with the game script, having 11 rushes for 50 yards and 1 target for 1 receptions and 3 receiving yards for 5.8 fantasy points. Yes, that isn't a performance that we're going home and cheering about, but we have to understand that besides having the potential handcuff to Alvin Kamara in an offense that is certainly going to feature the running back position as it always has year over year, Tony Jones played 42% of the snaps yesterday against the Green Bay Packers. He's only, rostered in 23% of leagues as it currently stands. If Tony Jones continues to get more opportunity, continues to play more and more in this offense, and looks like Latavius Murray, there could be an opportunity because of how many wide receivers this offense is missing. They don't have as many target options. Tony Jones could play more. We could see 2 back sets in out of this backfield. I mean, just going back a couple years ago, we saw Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara both find a lot of success in this offense together. You never know about Tony Jones, and you're pretty much getting insurance on your investment of Alvin Kamara. The next running back is similarly a handcuff. We're going to talk about Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell is a rookie running back, and he's going to be playing behind Miles Sanders. Now, what we heard all offseason was that Boston Scott, based on beat writers talking about the first team reps of the Philadelphia Eagles this offseason, we saw a lot of Boston Scott there splitting with Miles Sanders, but we didn't see a single sign of Boston Scott this last week. I mean, we saw a lot of Kenneth Gainwell, whether it was his 9 rushing attempts for 37 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and 2 receptions on 3 targets for 6 yards and 11.3 fantasy points. A guy that's only rostered in 8% of leagues. Perhaps, yes, the game script definitely did take it away for him and give him the opportunity to run the ball, but this offense looked very primed and ready for a good season ahead of them. Of course, Miles Sanders played well on the ground, so did Jalen Hurts, but if you continue to get more opportunity for a young running back like Kenneth Gainwell, who could certainly be used in the slot position, can be moved around this offense out wide, and certainly have himself opportunities there, I think Kenneth Gainwell is not only a guy that you could potentially have as a handcuff option, because we know Miles Sanders in years past has dealt with injuries. I think Kenneth Gainwell can make a pretty big impact as not only just an insurance guy, but in the future, maybe someone that gets more and more opportunity in this respective offense. The last mention I want to go ahead and do is Ty Johnson at number 6. Man, this Jets offense is just as bad as I remember. Yes, we saw some promising things from, of course, Zach Wilson and Corey Davis, but that's about it. You know, Elijah Moore with still Jamison Crowder and, Keelan Cole out wasn't featured. We saw more Braxton Berrios. Now, when we look at the running back position, yeah, my hidden gems did not hit this week, but that's just what happens. You take big shots and you get burnt pretty big as well. And that's what happened with Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman had only 11 offensive snaps on Sunday, 9 carries for 24 rushing yards, 0 receptions on 0 targets, nothing else. Terrible performance overall. But at least he ran the ball 9 times on his 11 snaps. But I don't really care about that because he wasn't efficient and he didn't run the ball anymore. He didn't get work in the PPR format. Michael Carter, on the other hand, 4 carries for 6 yards. He played more than Coleman. Still didn't matter. But the guy that was in the backfield for more than half the game, in fact, 53.85% of the time, was Ty Johnson. Yeah, he only ran the ball 4 times for 15 yards, had 3 targets, 1 reception for 11 yards. Great. He put up 3.1 fantasy points and a half PPR. And yeah, it's underwhelming, but he did play 50+% of the time. And if in fact we're going to lean away from Tevin Coleman in the coming weeks, then Ty Johnson's the guy, because he is trusted as a PPR receiver and the guy that is going to be pass blocking and helping, because Mekhi Becton did have a knee injury and is going to be out for a couple weeks. That's their star left tackle for the New York Jets. So if you're going to need a pass blocker in the backfield, the guy that can catch the ball, Ty Johnson's your man. I think he is the guy that could potentially take over the running back position for the New York Jets in the coming weeks, and that's why I wanted to mention him. Now that we've covered the top 6 waiver wire targets for the running back position, we can go ahead and move on and start beginning to talk about the wide receiver position, because there are a lot of guys that played absolutely out of their mind. And I just want to go ahead and preface, I'm not going to be mentioning guys like Marvin Jones or Jaylen Waddle because they should already be rostered in your leagues. In fact, these 2 gentlemen are rostered in 65% of leagues or more on the various websites of Yahoo, ESPN Fantasy, and NFL.com. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be mentioning players that are widely rostered already. I want to go after guys that are pretty much available in 60+% of leagues, so that everybody has the opportunity of going out and getting them. Just going ahead and putting that out there. We can begin with our number 1, Tim Patrick. The reason why Tim Patrick is our number 1 is because Jerry Jeudy did sustain a high ankle sprain. And with Tim Patrick already producing well this past week, 4 catches on 4 targets, had himself 39 receiving yards and a touchdown, 11.9 fantasy points and a half PPR. He's only rostered in 2% of leagues as it currently stands, and he played in 69.7% of the Denver Broncos offensive snaps. I mean, he was on the field for 70% of the time, which is fantastic. Now that we see Jerry Jeudy potentially missing more time, with him potentially even going to the injured reserve with this high ankle sprain, which looked very severe, there is a potential where Tim Patrick gets even more opportunity in this offense. Of course, we saw only 3 targets go in the direction of Courtland Sutton, and he was only able to catch 1. And what we've seen from Tim Patrick in the past, I mean, he stepped up last season in the absence of Courtland Sutton. So why not step up in the absence of a Jerry Jeudy this upcoming season. Last year in 2020, Tim Patrick between weeks 3 through 14 was the number 28 overall wide receiver. He is definitely capable, regardless of the quarterback there, of putting up great performances and scoring. And this, this 4-catch, 40-yard, 1 touchdown kind of performance is pretty much the hallmark performance of what Tim Patrick does on a weekly basis, based on what he has done in his career when he's given the opportunity to do so. So he is certainly my number one receiving option that I'm going after this upcoming week, if in fact I am in need of someone to fill the gap of Jerry Jeudy in the coming weeks, or just need more wide receiver depth on my team. Moving on to our number 2, we have Sterling Shepard of the New York Giants. The reason why I wanted to mention Sterling Shepard is because he absolutely balled out yesterday against a defense that, in the Denver Broncos, on the other side of this matchup of Tim Patrick, is a tougher one, especially in the secondary. But regardless of that, Sterling Shepard was able to ball out, had himself 9 targets, 7 receptions, 113 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for 20.8 fantasy points. As of this current moment in time, he's only rostered in 39% of Yahoo leagues and played 95% of the offensive snaps for the New York Giants. And to be honest, when I look at what Sterling Shepard has done in the past and what he could potentially do this upcoming year, and the confidence that Daniel Jones has when throwing in the direction of Sterling Shepard, it really shouldn't surprise many of us, considering in 2020, from week 7 through 17, after Sterling Shepard came back from, of course, his injury, he was the number 22 overall wide receiver, averaging 8 targets per game. Again, there's a lot of potential there, and obviously he produced a lot this last week. On 40 routes run, he had 9 targets. That's about 22.5% of the time going in his direction. I'm glad with that number being as high as it is in comparison to Galladay and Slayton, who weren't able to do anything. I mean, in terms of opportunities, snaps, routes run, it went Shepard, Galladay, and Slayton, and that's pretty much how their production went. So ultimately, in my opinion, I think Sterling Shepard certainly is going to have more and more opportunity as the weeks go on. And if he can continue to see a lot of targets, why not go ahead and pick him up, potentially play him as a wide receiver 3 flex option. We have Christian Kirk as our number 3. Christian Kirk had a monster game. Similar to a Sterling Shepard, he had himself a good amount of targets, but found the end zone, which definitely separates you from the rest of the pack, because it is extremely difficult to find the ever-elusive touchdown, but he was able to do it twice. Yeah, 2 touchdowns, which led to 21.5 fantasy points. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 70 receiving yards. We'll take that, but being able to score twice is unbelievable. Now, going into the season, we already knew that AJ Green was going to be the number 2 wide receiver, and in terms of snap counts, he certainly was this past weekend. Rondale Moore was a guy that was brought in that maybe was going to take over the slot position and pretty much eliminate Christian Kirk from this lineup, but that wasn't even the case, even moderately close. In fact, Christian Kirk played twice as many snaps as Rondale Moore. He played 56.52% of the offensive snaps and is only rostered in 14% of leagues on Yahoo right now. What I remember from last year, 2020, Christian Kirk, yes, has been a very inconsistent wide receiver in his career, but last year he had a 3-game stint in which he was putting up 20 points, 18 points, 20 points. And if in fact this offense is going to continue to torch defenses, they get to play against Minnesota this upcoming week, I think there's a very good possibility that Christian Kirk could have himself another great performance. If I'm you and you think that your league mates are gullible, you pick up a Christian Kirk and you try to sell him immediately, and you try to get as much back as you can, because you won't have to spend that high of a waiver wire priority on it, because you can go after the other running back or wide receiver options and potentially hope that he falls to you, and then you can go ahead and move him. But regardless, in terms of the opportunity that this team is going to have, they have a lot of guys touching the ball, whether it is DeAndre Hopkins, Rondale Moore, AJ Green, Christian Kirk, Chase Edmonds out of the backfield. There's a lot of guys that are going to get Andy Isabella. Eventually, Christian Kirk will disappear like he has in years past. Hopefully he won't. Maybe he's going to have himself a breakout season here. But ultimately, as of right now, I'm pretty safe with him at number 3. Nelson Agholor is my number 4. Nelson Agholor, another wide receiver that found the end zone with 7 targets on 38 routes run. That's a decent percentage, not great, obviously. I mean, in comparison to all other wide receivers on this team, yes, he was out-targeted by Jakobi Meyers, but there was only 3 wide receivers on this team that were targeted. Jakobi Meyers, number 1, with 9 targets. Of course, we had Nelson Agholor with 7 targets, and then we had Kendrick Bourne with 3 targets. Outside of that, the running back position and the tight end position were the only other positions targeted. So that's great. There's not much competition for him in terms of the wide receiver position. Agholor is going to solidify himself as one of the number 1 or 2 options in this offense in the receiving game, which is fantastic considering he caught the ball 5 times for 72 yards and a receiving touchdown on a nice slant route that, of course, was able to get him 15.7 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. He's only rostered in 33% of leagues. We know how much success he was able to find with the Raiders offense last year, but there was a lot of inconsistency there. If in fact we can get him into a more solidified role here with the New England Patriots, we could end up seeing him have great performances. Plays against the New York Jets secondary this upcoming week. We of course know how much of a benefit that is for not only the quarterback, but him as a receiver in this option. In yesterday's games, he played 85.33% of the total offensive snaps. So again, if he's going to be on the field all the time, whether it is as a blocking option or at least a receiving option, he will continue to see more and more targets as the weeks go on and find stability in terms of his overall production. The touchdown is obviously the ever elusive one, but ultimately I'm happy with what Nelson Agholor was able to produce in week 1. We have Rondale Moore as our number 5, a guy that I obviously mentioned earlier. I'm looking for upside. I don't want to go after Zach Pascal because I've done that for the last 3 years. And what have I got from it? I've gotten burnt. I don't want to go after players like that. I mean, that is not what I seek in terms of my roster. I know I have better receivers than that. I'm looking for guys that in the future, in the coming weeks, could take over a role, could be more of a highlighted option in an offense. And I think Rondale Moore is going to do that. He had himself 5 targets, 4 receptions, and 68 receiving yards for 8.8 fantasy points in his first game of his NFL career. Yeah, he only played 28% of the offensive snaps. Okay, great. But at least he was targeted 35% of the time on the routes that he actually ran. So when he's on the field, they're designed to potentially go in his direction, and that's great to see. Of course, as the weeks go on, and the more he balls out, there will be more of an expanded role for him. Just putting it out there as another wide receiver rookie option that could end up exploding. Another one that I want to mention, that I mentioned on my hidden gems, is Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall had 6 targets, 3 receptions, 26 receiving yards, 4.1 fantasy points. Not the greatest week in the world, no. But we're looking forward to the weeks at hand. I mean, in comparison to Robbie Anderson, who only caught the ball once on Sunday, yeah, there is a potential where Terrace Marshall could win the job, could end up being a number 2, number 1 wide receiver option on the team. It just will take time to see how this offense is going to continue to use him in comparison to what they did in week 1. He played 53% of the offensive snaps. If you can get him to that 70% range, continue to get him more opportunities in this offense. I know Christian McCaffrey, 9 targets, 9 receptions. He's going to be eating a lot. But there's always room for one of these rookie wide receivers to be stashed on your bench. And if, in fact, you don't need to immediately make moves for the wide receiver position to get someone that needs to be plugged in immediately, I think these last 2 options, 5 and 6, can certainly be high upside plays in the coming weeks. All right, the tight end position is next, and I wanted to go ahead and mention 6 players because I know the tight end position is thin. And if, in fact, you weren't able to get some of the top guys, you may be hurting. But ultimately, across the board, we did see a lot of production from Hawkinson, Travis Kelce. We saw a lot of work from Dallas Goedert there. Tyler Higbee looked good. But if you're a Robert Tonyan, Mike Gesicki, manager, you may be hurting and you may be looking elsewhere. These are the options that I wanted to mention. Number 1 is Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett is rostered in a lot of leagues, 66% of the time. But again, it's the tight end position, and if in fact he's available, I would go after him. Yes, he saw less targets than Will Disley, but he was featured down in the red zone. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 20 receiving yards, and a touchdown for 9 fantasy points. In comparison to the snap count, they both pretty much played the same amount of snaps. The Seattle Seahawks used a lot of 12 personnel, similar to how the Rams have done in years past. So if in fact you want to go ahead and invest, he's an option there at the tight end position. The next one is Cole Kmet. I think as of right now, in comparison to everyone's leagues, he's probably the most widely available, in comparison to a Gerald Everett. And he had a pretty promising performance last night against the Rams. 7 targets, 5 receptions, 42 receiving yards, 6.7 fantasy points. I know that's not the greatest, but it's better than 0 points. Again, I did play Mike Gesicki this last week. It did hurt. But as of right now, Cole Kmet is only rostered in 34% of leagues, played 74% of the offensive snaps, while Jimmy Graham only played 14 offensive snaps last night on Sunday Night Football. Jimmy Graham is pretty much relegated to not even being a starter on this team because they don't need him. They're trying to look to the future. Cole Kmet is exactly that. And hopefully once Justin Fields takes the starting spot, Kmet could break out of his shell even more and be a huge option here. Number 3 is Jared Cook. Jared Cook had himself a good game. The stats that I wanted to potentially look at in comparison to years past. Of course, we know Jared Cook in years past has had just as many receiving touchdowns in the last 2 years than a Mark Andrews. And that's a crazy number, but it is what it is. Against the Washington football team yesterday, Jared Cook had 8 targets leading to 5 receptions and 56 receiving yards for 8.1 fantasy points. He's only rostered in 26% of leagues and played 58.02% of the offensive snap share. Now, when I went ahead and looked at how many offensive snaps he played 47 exactly. He, in the last 2 seasons with the New Orleans Saints, has not even come close to playing 47 offensive snaps in a singular game. He, again, was often relegated to being a guy that was only used down in the red zone or was only used in specific packages and played 15 to 30 snaps a single game. He saw a lot of usage with this offense, and if in fact they're going to continue to highlight him, then maybe he has some value going forward. We have Juwan Johnson as our number 4. He did score 2 touchdowns from, of course, Jameis famous Winston eating W's over there over the Green Bay Packers. Juwan Johnson is currently a hybrid fantasy option in Yahoo. He is a wide receiver / tight end, so he can be filled into either spot, but he did have 3 targets, 3 receptions for 21 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, but he barely played, guys. He played 11 total offensive snaps, which, again, isn't fun. I don't know if I want to risk that, considering Adam Trotman, one of their other tight ends there, he played 51 total offensive snaps. So he is an option if you are potentially looking and hoping that Juwan Johnson could be a red zone threat for this offense, considering they don't have anything else. But in the coming weeks, just a guy that we have to keep our eye on. Dalton Schultz, another player I want to keep my eye on because of the fact that he and Blake Jarwin still both played identical percentage of snaps. It makes me think that there could be a week where Blake Jarwin sees more opportunity. But if Dalton Schultz is going to be more and more of a receiving threat on this offense in comparison to what we anticipated, with Jarwin coming back and being more of a split, we could end up seeing, the 6 targets, 6 receptions, 45 receiving yards from last week continue it to expand, considering the fact that Michael Gallup is going to be out. So if in fact that is a thing, I don't mind the investment of a Dalton Schultz because, again, we know that the Dallas Cowboys specifically want to target him. I think he had 89 targets in the 15 games he played last season. Could be a decent tight end option in the coming weeks. The last tight end option I want to mention is Pharaoh Brown, and I don't know what to expect from the Texans in the coming weeks. They play against the Cleveland Browns this week. That's all I know. And yes, Travis Kelce torched them, but I know that Pharaoh Brown isn't Travis Kelce. I know that. But a guy that we have to keep our eye on because he did have 4 catches for 67 yards, 8.7 fantasy points. And there really isn't that much competition there in terms of targets because outside of Brandon Cooks, they ran the ball the entire time. So maybe if in fact Pharaoh Brown can become one of those safety blankets for Tyrod Taylor in the coming weeks, could be a decent option in the future. Let's move on to the quarterback position. We have only 3 suggestions for this week because, again, if you're going to stream a quarterback this early on, or at least stash one for the coming weeks, I think these are the 3 main options that I'm comfortable going ahead and suggesting. Beginning Jameis Winston, of course. Listen, if you're going to throw for 5 passing touchdowns and score 29.62 fantasy points, great. That is incredible. I look at his upcoming schedule and think the Carolina Panthers, New England Patriots, New York Giants, and Washington football team. Those are not easy matchups. I know Carolina this upcoming week is not bad if, in fact, you want to stream him as an option there. But again, we have to remember, he only had 148 passing yards. That is not the greatest. He didn't really air it out that much. He was given a lot of opportunities because of the really good field positioning, the turnovers the litany of mistakes that Green Bay Packers offense made. It benefited Jameis Winston. And yes, maybe in the weeks to come, he'll explode and have even more potential yardage touchdowns going in his direction. But as of right now, he's a guy that I want to potentially pick up as my quarterback too. If in fact you're going to deal with a bye week at week 6, maybe a decent option, but maybe a guy that you want to stream in the coming weeks, specifically against Carolina. He has his experience against them because, again, he used to always play in the division with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, playing against the Carolina Panthers twice a season. The next option I want to mention is Teddy B. Teddy Bridgewater had himself a very good game yesterday against the New York Giants. And though the New York Giants defense is stout up front and wasn't really giving up much, eventually the floodgates broke open. And Teddy Bridgewater, Melvin Gordon, guys like Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, they were able to find success. Having 264 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 19 rushing yards, and 20.46 fantasy points is great. And now he gets to play against the Jacksonville Jaguars this upcoming week and the New York Jets in the following week. He's only rostered in 11% of leagues. Maybe an option that can be available to you if, in fact, you need it. We move on to our final quarterback option that I want to suggest. It is Justin Fields. Based on the performance of Andy Dalton, of course, fumbling and throwing an interception and not really being able to help this team stay in the game as a game manager, I think they're very soon going to move to Justin Fields. I believe it's going to be after week 2 because they're going to give Andy Dalton the opportunity to play against his former team, the Cincinnati Bengals, this upcoming week. But weeks after that, they play against Cleveland, Detroit, Las Vegas, Green Bay. Those are fantastic defensive options. I think Justin Fields, only rostered in 51% of leagues at this current moment in time, can be picked up and put on your bench. He has the rushing ability. He could end up being that dual threat quarterback that everybody needs to have in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. The last things that I wanted to mention is defenses. Defensive waiver wire pickups. Only 2 defenses that going into this upcoming week are teams that I'm very confident with. Number 1, the Arizona Cardinals. Besides being the number 1 defense in week 1 of the 2021 fantasy football season, absolutely destroying the Tennessee Titans. I mean, we thought the Tennessee Titans were good until the Arizona Cardinals came into town and bopped them. I mean, they dog walked them. Chandler Jones, 5 sacks, 2 strip sacks, almost a defensive touchdown that was called short on the 1-yard line because, I mean, the guy's knee hit and he got touched. But regardless, my goodness, this defense scored 16 points, is only rostered in 7% of leagues. They play against Minnesota. Minnesota was awful against the Cincinnati Bengals. And we all know Minnesota's offensive line, they are a run-blocking group. They cannot pass block to save their lives. And I think J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones are definitely going to get after them. And then they get to play against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Arizona's a defense that I want to certainly have in the coming weeks. The last thing I want to mention is the New Orleans Saints defense. They themselves have pretty good matchups in the coming weeks, though. You know, they're currently rostered in 32% of leagues on Yahoo. They scored 15 points against the Green Bay Packers defense. They play against Sam Darnold, then Mac Jones, then Daniel Jones, then Taylor Heineke in the next 4 weeks. This is a very solid defense that we know year over year is fantastic. They have one of the best run-stopping defenses in the league. They will force these young quarterbacks to pass the ball. And if and when they do, they're going to find themselves forcing a lot of turnovers and finding a lot of defensive success. That is why I want to mention the New Orleans Saints. Anyway, those are my Week 2 waiver wire targets for the 2021 fantasy football season. Again, thank you everybody for watching. Tomorrow we'll be talking about my top 36 running back rankings as we have more perspective as to what we can potentially expect to see in Week 2 after the, of course, I mean, I don't even know how to describe Week 1 at times. It was an interesting turn of events to say the very least. But we'll review everybody's performances from the last week tomorrow and see how everything goes. Anyway, if you like today's episode and you want to continue to stay up to date, click that subscribe button. Make sure you click the like button down below. Thank you everybody for watching. Enjoy tonight's game between the Raiders and the Ravens. And until next time, tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.